for part 2 of our NACADA panel session and podcast episode titled Lessons Learned from Advising Administrators, Innovative Approaches to Managing Change. In part 1, we heard from Nicole Kent and Kevin Thomas. For part 2, we have more amazing and knowledgeable guests to share their experiences and expertise. And of course, Melinda Anderson, our Executive Director of NACADA, is also here. Melinda, are you ready to continue this panel discussion?
Absolutely, Matt. The first part was riveting, and so I know the second part will be as well, because Leah and Tara are amazing professionals and care deeply about student success. So I'm excited for our guests to be able to hear from them as well in this part.
Yes, for sure. So let's introduce our guest. So let's introduce Leah Frierson, who is also a previous guest on the podcast. Leah provides leadership for the Student Academic Affairs Division of the College Office in Arts and Sciences from Washington University in St. Louis. In her newly created role, in collaboration with the Vice Dean and Office Leadership, she is responsible for setting the vision and priorities for the Student Academic Affairs Division, which provides academic advising as well as student programming and services to arts and sciences students. She's been in higher education for nearly 2 decades, working in areas such as academic advising, student retention, athletics, as well as competitive academic and leadership development programs for students. In NACADA, Leah has served in steering committees focused on first generation and exploratory students, and will complete participation in the NACADA Emerging Leaders Program at this year's annual conference, and will also serve on the advisory board for EOP and the Administrators Institute. Leah received an AA from Southwestern Community College, a BA in Communication Arts with a focus in broadcast media, a master's in physical education, sports administration, and her EDD in educational leadership, higher education administration from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Welcome back, Leah.
Well, thank you. I feel so blessed to be back a second time. I was a little nervous I wouldn't get invited back again. So thanks for inviting me back, Matt.
Oh, we had to have you back on. And Melinda, who's our new guest?
Yes, and so our new guest is Tara Stoppel, Warden, and she serves as the Assistant Vice Provost for Advising and Academic Services at the University of Cincinnati. She specializes in strategic leadership and innovation program design for advising, enrollment management, and student success. So how many of us, right, have seen that combination? And so she's fantastic in that role. Tara was the founding director of the UC Center for Exploratory Studies in 2003 and published by NACADA as an exemplary practice in 2007. She established the UC Office for Advising and Academic Services in 2013. And then in 2016, Tara designed and launched a new Center for Pathways Advising and Student Success, which houses transfer and transition student advising, early alert, retention outreach, and advisor training and development. As a part of her commitment to student success, Tara is an advocate for leadership practice, equity, and inclusion. She proposed the establishment of UC's annual Equity and Inclusion Conference, now in its 11th year, Matt. And she now serves as an executive sponsor of New Advisors of Color Employee Resource Group. So Tara was also honored to receive the Barbara Schooley's Award for Outstanding Contributions to the UC Academic Advising Association in 2017. From an educational perspective, Tara has completed her MED in Counseling and Student Services with a focus in higher education administration, and a BA at the University of North Texas. And she's also a graduate of the Higher Education Resource Services HERS Institute. So thank you so much, Tara, for being able to join us. And you've also served many roles actually in the Association of NACADA, and most recently coming off as the chair of the Administrative Institute, where you've been a phenomenal faculty member. So thank you so much for being able to join us today.
Thank you, Melinda. I'm super excited to be with you.
Yeah, and this is just some of the wonderful things that Tara and Leah have done. There's so much more that they've contributed to higher ed and academic advising, and I'm just honored that you both are here today for this podcast and for this panel session. So let's go with the first question, and that's to tell us your path, your journey into higher ed. Leah, let's start with you. And I know you're a previous podcast guest, but for those that are new and listening to this on the NACADA app, on the on-demand session, tell us a little bit more about you.
So I'll start from the beginning. Way back when I woke up and dreamed about being in higher education. So I started off in athletics. I was a college athlete, and then kind of happened into being a women's basketball coach and started there at a really small institution in Laurinburg, North Carolina, St. Andrews College. But did coaching for about 10 years. I was an assistant, I was a head coach, I was a director of basketball operations. And if you know anything about athletics, when coaching staffs change, head coaches change, the staff changes. And I saw it as an opportunity to really expand my portfolio. I was always responsible for kind of the academic piece of our teams, study hall, tutoring, working with faculty, working with our academic support unit, and that I was always drawn to that. And so when we transitioned head coaches, I had the opportunity to stay on at my institution and serve as an academic counselor, where I work with students that had academic challenges. Perhaps they didn't have all of the criteria to be admitted, and so they may have been provisional, or maybe they struggled in the previous semester. My entire caseload was that, and fell in love with working with those students. A lot of the skills that I had in coaching in terms of individual development, looking at strengths, I carried over into that role. So I did that for a couple of years, and then that combined some bit of advising, and started doing academic advising in my next role. And that was really, I like to call it a hybrid role of student affairs and academic affairs. So I got a chance to do some retention work, some enrollment management, admissions liaisoning, co-taught a class, did advising. I did all of the things, right? And it was a wonderful experience I had at UNC Wilmington. Very transformative, I will say that. And then I moved on to the McNair Scholars Program, which is a wonderful program that does PhD preparation for students of color, first gen and low income students. So I had a really great opportunity to go there, build out some things for those students and help them to get into PhD programs, and then transition to being an assistant dean at UNC Chapel Hill for a few years. And that was a great experience, right? Like high volume, big institution, lots of things going on. And then had the opportunity to be a director of academic advising for a faculty-driven and more of a faculty-driven model, which was an experience, a learning experience in and of itself, but learned a lot. And then came back and worked for a scholar program called the Robertson Scholars Program over at Duke. And I love to talk about that program and kind of pub it just a little bit because of the uniqueness of the program. I managed the academic piece of that program, and it worked with students across both Duke and Chapel Hill. And so I was responsible for curriculum, learning the curriculum and policy, working with administrators from both campuses, working with financial aid, and all these different departments across both campuses. So you can imagine my brain was ready to explode, but it was such a good experience. And I felt like if I could do that, I could do pretty much anything. And now I'm approaching my 1-year anniversary at Washington University in St. Louis. We underwent a pretty sizable reorg, and my position is brand new, and I serve as Associate Dean of Advising and Director of Student Academic Affairs. And my team is 26 strong at the moment, with 4 functional spaces that I'm responsible for managing. So, we're still building and tweaking and hiring many, many people. So hopefully the dust is settling, but that's where I am at the moment. So thanks, Matt.
Yeah, and happy almost 1-year anniversary. That's pretty
Thank you.
exciting. And I'm a terrible moderator. I had overlays created for you all when we're supposed to read the bio. So I'm just going to throw these up real quick. So at least we did create them. Let's show it. So again, welcoming Leah, and then also with Tara. So Tara, do you want to talk about your journey in higher ed?
I sure can, Matt. I think you'll want to hear perhaps my journey from being an RA 30 years ago to assistant vice provost now. I sometimes tell people even now, I'm still just an overgrown RA. Don't let the new title fool you. I really found my passion and my purpose very early on. And I was very, very lucky at the age of 19 to discover that I could work with students outside of the classroom to help improve their college experience. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And every job that I've had since then has been a different iteration and version of that in some way. So I was fortunate to work as an RA for a couple of years, but then I worked my way up through every single position that there was in housing at the University of North Texas. They have a wonderful program there. And they do a good job also in investing in people's leadership development and professional development. So I was really well prepared by the time that I finished graduate school and had gone through several different roles and positions within campus housing at that point, to step into the role of Director of Residence Life at a small private liberal arts institution. And then that job changed every single year that I was there. For the 4 years that I was there, I became Associate Dean of Students as well as Director of Career Development. I oversaw the campus judicial processes during that time as well for part of that time. And then in about 20 years ago, I was hired by the University of Cincinnati to open the Center for Exploratory Studies. So that was fantastic, and it gave me my first opportunity to design an advising center from the ground up. And I'm excited to say that I've had another couple of opportunities to do that here at UC. And so I moved from the directorial position of the Center for Exploratory Studies into an assistant dean position for arts and sciences, leading 2 advising centers. And then from that role, because arts and sciences is our largest college, which is often the case at many large public institutions, my time was being utilized so heavily to create things that were being used by the university community that I became provostial liaison half-time. So I was doing a role that I call a 60-60 split between the provost office and the college office, supporting advising university-wide, and then eventually began working as the director of advising and academic services and established this office from the ground up. So I'm very pleased to tell you that that's been part of the story of advising becoming part of the student success leadership at the University of Cincinnati. And I feel like that's happened in many places. Advising is seen so much as the crossroads of student success. So our office now also includes orientation, transfer credit evaluation, transfer and transition and pre-professional advising, our advising tools and technology. We have several different offices that we coordinate under this umbrella, and then provide leadership university-wide to coordinate our decentralized advising community of 18 advising centers as well. So it's a lot of fun. Again, at this point in my life, I still just consider myself an overgrown RA, which I'm not sure if my people appreciate hearing that, but at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that we're creating the right environment for our students.
Right. No, I just want to, I agree with how housing and res life helps to shape, development. Like when I think about, my time in residence education, I think about, chickering and petri dishes, and that just being this wonderful opportunity to see how students are growing and developing in those spaces, which is directly related to the work that we do around student services. And, Leah, hearing your perspective, coming from athletics and how you've grown and changed and moved up organizationally, I think it just really speaks to, which I know a lot of people appreciate, is hearing how things evolved. And the one thing that we hear all the time is that a job could have a different title on any campus, right? But at the core of the work, in terms of what you do, it was just wonderful for you to be able to share how you've evolved in your respective roles. And so, I've got the second question. So kind of speaking on that perspective, right, of how you've grown in your roles and how you have come to be in higher education as a profession, and how you see yourselves as leaders. Our question is what is your role specifically? But then also, how have you seen academic advising change or shift since the pandemic? So I always think it's really interesting to hear how you're currently operating. So like, yes, how I've grown up in higher education and how I'm currently realizing the way that I'm working. But, within your respective roles right now, how can you, what description, right, would you give somebody to briefly talk about what you're doing? But then how has the pandemic shifted and changed the way that you're currently operating? And we'll, we're gonna start with Leah, and then we'll go to Tara. I realize we both are like, who do you want to talk first? But yeah, let's go back to Leah.
I'll throw a wink in there when I want to go first. I'll throw a wink in there. No, so my current role, I manage a team of individuals that, again, they do the day-to-day of all of our student-facing programs and support services. So kind of more simplified is our team manages orientation for the college, academic advising for the college, graduation for the college. We have a number of other kind of support services, but really what it boils down to is looking at the end-to-end experience for the student, right? The entire student life cycle, and making sure that at every point and juncture of their experience, there is support, there is programming, and there's development that is happening for all of our students. And so my job, as it's continuing to evolve, is to make sure that we are thinking about one, how we do that, right? How we do our work, what our students actually need in terms of even the changes through the pandemic, right? So a lot of it is lots of conversations. And so you pile all that on with lots of change at our institution, lots of change in our department coming. I won't say coming out of a pandemic, but slowing down with the pandemic. It is a lot, right? So I would say, I think you kind of asked like how would I describe my job? I manage people first, support people first, and then I strategize second. Is how I look at that. I am a people first manager, supervisor, leader. I firmly believe that if you don't take care of your people and make sure that they are well and they are good, that they are feeling some sense of value and satisfaction in what they do, they can't serve our students well. So I would describe that part. In terms of how I've seen advising evolve, I mean, I think we all know it has been evolving for many, many years, but connected to the pandemic, I would say a couple of things. So I think the pandemic forced us to become better communicators across many of the other institutions I've worked at, and especially my last couple. It has forced us to stay on each other's radar so that our students don't fall through the cracks, so that we know what we're doing, so that we're not in such silos. And I think that is one of the good things that have come out of the pandemic for students. I think that we are seeing increased partnerships across campus. I think, as you all know, our higher education can be very siloed sometimes. And I think it's really forced us to think about, talking with our campus partners in student affairs and academic affairs and enrollment management, and figuring out like, what are you seeing, right? Because all of us have a different lens by which we do our work. And so talking with student affairs or the career center or enrollment management, like, what are you seeing? What are students asking you as you are engaging with them during your process, and thinking about how we can better bridge some of the ways in which we support our students. And then I would say, I think we are forced to think about access, right? We all talk about access all the time and inclusivity, but I think it has really highlighted some of our weak points in those areas and caused us to really question, like, are we really inclusive, right? Are we really providing access to students? I know in my current institution, we have a fairly large focus on socioeconomic diversity, right? And what that means when we bring in more students that are lower income or first gen students, right? And so thinking about how they have access to information, how they understand that information is really important. And I think it's forcing us to take a deeper look at, looking at students who didn't have access to AP credit, right? And what that means for us, or looking at students that have to have a job. It's not enough to just throw money at their tuition and give them access to all these grants. We know that sometimes our students are sending money home, and so they have to work, which means that may impact the number of credit hours they take, and all these different kind of dynamics. I think it's forcing us to take a deep dive into some of that.
Leah, I think I want to elevate what Leah said there too, because I agree with everything. that you've said, Leah. And I do think, in addition to all of those particular changes, one thing that I would add is we also have seen more validation of advising over that period of time. There's been some great national research published in the last couple of years that helps reinforce the impact of advising directly in terms of student success and retention, which has been very helpful. But the pressure is the other piece that has really elevated, I think, a lot since the pandemic. And the double pandemic, honestly, really made a big difference in the pressure that advisors were experiencing. And in the same time and space, enrollment pressures at every institution have increased. I think at almost every institution have increased significantly. And whether that enrollment pressure is because the institution feels that they're not enrolling enough students, or because we have too many students to be able to make sure that we're meeting their needs very effectively, those things both have been a real challenge. And that ties back in some regards to how my role has changed some over time, in addition to starting with a foundation in advising at my current institution and expanding more into student success. It's also further expanded now into leadership with College Credit Plus, Cincinnati Public Schools Strong, and some of that is designed to help reinforce and create better access pathways and think about how we restructure and redesign our institutions to be more student-centered and focused on the student rather than our own institutional histories, which we know have racialized bases. And so we really want to think about how do we do a better job for more students going forward in the future. But all of that means that we've got more and more pressure on advisors as well. Student needs are increasing. Caseloads are quite commonly not exactly what they need to be for most of our advisors, but with enrollment pressures being so high, many institutions, I think advisors are feeling like they've been given a very different kind of a job than they used to have. So those are all things that we're thinking carefully about.
No, definitely. I agree. And so, Tara, if you can just share a little bit about, your role and how you've been navigating those challenges as well, just so people have a brief, perspective of what your role is at on the University of Cincinnati.
Well, I appreciate you asking, Melinda, but it changes every single year. So,
It usually does.
it's funny at this point. My actual title is Assistant Vice Provost of Advising, Academic Services, and Strategic Partnerships. They're thinking about changing it to Advising and Student Success, which has a very unfortunate acronym. So we're thinking about maybe Student Success and Advising as a different focus behind that. But some of that means helping us to think about things like, if we are serious about student success at the institution, why do deans only have budget hearings every year? Why do we not have student success hearings every year? How might we structure student success hearings so that at a large decentralized university, we're really thinking writ large about all of those different things that we invest in the student and not only monitoring student outcomes data. That's a very important piece of this. But most deans don't elevate into the positions that they're in because they're student success experts. And so in many cases, they are very appreciative of that help and that partnership to really understand not only how do we do a great job for advisors and in our advising community. And I'm pleased to say that we've done a very, very good job with our advising quality over time and investments in advising over time at the University of Cincinnati. We still have definite room to improve and do better there in terms of the support that we provide, the numbers of advisors we're providing to our students. But how do we think strategically about what gets outcomes for our students? And in many places, that's really rethinking our structures, rethinking our curriculum, looking for choke points in the curriculum, looking for toxic course combinations, trying to identify where does student success coaching appropriately enhance academic advising as part of the broader advising community. How do advisors really need to understand a certain amount of financial aid information? It's really, coming back to that concept of advising as the crossroads of student success and realizing academic advising is not all of student success, but it can serve as a launch pad for many of those other pieces.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate both of your perspectives. And, it's one of those moments. And I love the fact, Leah, you were like, as we progress through, like, yes, we're still in a pandemic culture, environment, still looking for ways to improve upon the things that were highlighted in terms of, definite deficits. But then how do we capitalize on those opportunities? And so, thank you, Tara, for also bringing in that enrollment management perspective as well. That's a pretty powerful way that we've been driven in terms of thinking through change, to make sure that from an equity standpoint, right? And Leah, you mentioned that too. Equity became a big issue as we were thinking about, who we were serving and why we were serving them and how to serve them better. So thank you both for your responses.
Yeah, and I really like Lee. I really liked your response in terms of you support people first and strategize second. I mean, I think that is definitely a great tip for any administrator or leader to have. And then Tara, you were mentioning like there's a lot of that national research that's been published that's showing that there is definitely that positive impact that advising has. But you also talked about some of those different types of pressures, including enrollment pressures, pressures on advisors, caseloads, and then connected to that is burnout. And we hear about well-being a lot now. I mean, that's been around, but now it seems more and more we hear about advisor well-being. And I guess from both of your perspectives, what kind of innovative practices, have either your institution has implemented or you've helped implement, because you have a lot of experience in terms of creating things, building things from the ground up, that have ensured not only student success, but nowadays also is connected to the well-being and retention of those that you supervise. So Tara, do you want to go first?
Sure. So one of the things I'm excited to share with you that I think many people in the NACADA community are aware of, but perhaps not everyone, is that we founded the first Advisors of Color Employee Resource Group at the University of Cincinnati. And I think last I knew, we were the first in the country to have that particular type of opportunity for our advisors at the University of Cincinnati. And within that structure, within that support structure for many of our advisors, we've also come to really think carefully about how do we reinforce equity across the institution in our advising practices, and in a way that is both sustainable and accountable. I will also give great acknowledgement to NACADA's REI, Race, Ethnicity, and Inclusion work group that was led by Jessica Staten and Loxley Nibbs originally. Their work in that inspired, our institution inspired me personally to establish a task force at the University of Cincinnati, an REI task force that made 17 recommendations for how we could create a more sustainable and accountable advising community. Those recommendations actually resulted in pay equity for advisors. I'm pleased to tell you 108 advisors got salary increases this week at the University of Cincinnati because of one of the recommendations of that task force. I was able to hire an assistant director for equity, inclusion, and advancement in advising, who will start on Monday. It's the only position of that type that we're aware of in advising specifically nationally. So we're very excited. I've told him Marcel Crawford will be our inaugural person in that role. And I've told him he may be freestyling for a little while because we're going to be building it from the ground up. But I think one of the other things that's really important and that I have had the opportunity to do even this week was to advocate with our board and our president and our provost for how much advising deficit we have in terms of the numbers of advisors that we need. We are 30 advisors short of the number of advisors we need at the University of Cincinnati. And I was able yesterday to be able to give them the data about how we assess that, what the payoff could potentially be if we do make the investment in our advisors to make sure that advisors have the capacity that they need to be able to do the work that they want to do with their students. And we know advising is teaching. We also know advising is part student affairs and part enrollment. But at the end of the day, advising can't only be about enrollment. That's not going to help our students, right? We need to make sure that the learning outcomes of advising are being accomplished, and that the student's personal support is also intact. Advising is all of those things. But advocating for resources for advising means speaking in terms of return on investment. And so part of my job is to tailor some information up and educate up to our administration in that way, to make sure that we can do what we need to do across our advising community, both for the sanity and professional lives of our advisors, but then also ultimately at the end of the day for that impact that translates to their students.
Tara, you've done a lot of really great things. I probably should have went first this time.
Leah, you got a lot to offer.
No.
So.
I'm like, dang. I mean, no, I actually, if it's okay, I would like to speak to the well-being and retention part of academic advisors, because that's the piece that is kind of my heartbeat at this moment. And I don't necessarily think these are things that are innovative, but I think that they are, if you're going to be a good administrator and a good leader, I think there are things to keep in mind, right? So, I mean, I think about, academic advisors are, for all intents and purposes, they are workhorses. They will do all the things all the time, say yes to everything. And I am a firm believer in work-life boundaries. And so one of the things in terms of building a culture of well-being, one, I try to practice what I preach to my advisors. And so things like advisors who are asking me, can I work through lunch so that I can leave an hour early or hour and a half early to pick up my kid? No, how about you take your lunch and then you still go pick up your child, right? Things like making sure that people actually take, not just in terms of to leave early, but take your lunch, take a 15-minute break, build in big blocks of time for you to process and have the opportunity to think about initiatives and ideas you have to improve your advising practice or get involved with things on campus. I've been pushing my team to let me know when you're doing really great things, right? So that you can be recognized. Building a culture of what kind of development do you want to get? My current team, they were allowed to do some things, but it was not necessarily something that's been pushed. And I want them to know, like, whatever that development is, let's think about what that looks like for you, right? What do you want to be involved in? How do you want to grow? Continuing to always have those conversations. I don't want advisors to feel like they have to walk on eggshells to ask for a day off. If you're tired, say you're tired. If you're overworked, if you feel like you're overwhelmed with work, let's talk through that and what that looks like, right? So for me, and here's another simple one that we probably don't think about. Let's not schedule back-to-back Zooms. When you're looking at scheduling something for someone, if there's a 30-minute block and you see someone has something before and after, let's think about what that means for them, right? And I try not to do that. Let's not send emails past 6:00 at night. And I am very tempted all the time because I am in meetings all day. And the first time I can get to things is at 7 or 8 o'clock. But my first thought is, what is the expectation that I am setting by sending an email at 7:30, 8:30, 9:30 at night from my team? I ask them not to do that ever. And if I have to do it, I tell them in advance, don't you open the email. This is the first time I can send it, but it is very, very rare. So I want us to start thinking about things like that. And I try to encourage my team to also think about that as well.
Leah, I think it's important that you said that too, because we set the tone, right? And when we're doing it, it's very hard for our people to believe that they have the support to not do it, right? So I appreciate you sharing that. I think, and that's something that many of us need to remember more often, but we definitely do set the tone.
Right. Well, I want to thank both of you for your perspectives, especially around advisor well-being, because I think sometimes people may feel like it's got to be these big overtures or these big gestures, right? But what I'm hearing is that it's in the daily operations, it's in the tone, it's in leadership, it's about the expectations that you're setting, that people have lives. And, given the current, work environment or institutional culture that people are in, sometimes you're right, it's this inherent pressure that we tell ourselves, right? So when you're leading folks and you want them to understand that, your life is important to me, right? Not just the work that you happen to do that I'm responsible for within these particular divisions or areas. I think it is very helpful for people to hear that it's not always going to be, oh, guess what? You're going to have a $5,000 pay raise, which is awesome sauce, right? So, Tara, kudos to, your institution being able to offer that, because money is important. I will never sit here and tell anybody that it is not. But it's also, the idea of a work culture and being able to show up and be your best self. And even on those days where you can't be your best self, it's still okay. Your work is still valued here, even if you're not hitting the nose to the grindstone from like 8 to 6:30. Leah, I'm gonna take your advice on those emails. I'm gonna tell people not to respond to them, because I don't expect people to respond, but you're right. It's about communicating the expectation that I don't expect you to respond, because this is when I can get to it. So sometimes, in leadership, people assume, right, that their folks know this about you, but I think that's a really strong point that you are also communicating so that people don't have to assume. So, one of our next questions when we think about this conversation around leadership and administration, what are some of the challenges that advisors or even you in leadership still face, as we're navigating not just this pandemic space, but how higher education is being reframed these days? What are some challenges you think advisors and you still face in terms of leading?
I think the biggest one that I have come across is seeing people that it is time for them to move up, to be promoted. You see the good work they're doing and trying to get them the experience, or if the current structure of your unit does not allow for a promotion. And that's really hard for me, right? Like, I've had a few of these conversations on my team with people who have been doing great work, who've picked up extra work, and they are ready and want to be promoted, but perhaps the structure itself does not allow for that because there's nowhere to promote them to. Um, and I don't personally feel good about giving people extra work. Here's some extra work, but we can't give you extra money or a title, to go along with that, more leadership responsibilities. And so I think that is something that I think very, very deeply about. And then I also thinking about salaries and pay equity is very, very difficult, because oftentimes those conversations are way above my head and I can fight all day. But certainly we know that resources are, there are different priorities for resources, or priorities are limited, or resources are limited. And it's really hard to look someone in the face and tell them, like, right now we cannot. Like, that is the most difficult thing, right? Or to tell someone, oh, you only get a 2.5% raise when the cost of gas, food, and housing has went up 15-20%. Right? Like, that is probably the most difficult thing that I think about frequently, and how to get people what they need.
Leah, I think that you're exactly right about that. And it's one of the reasons that we addressed that problem very recently. But I will say that one of the reasons that we got traction with our senior leadership to address that problem is because it was called out within our race, ethnicity, and inclusion task force work. And frankly, there are so many institutions that are really trying to elevate and prioritize that work at this point in time, that's really how I think that we got the attention to address compensation. But your point also about promotional opportunities, I think, is really one of the very hard ones, and I completely agree with you on that. Our advisors have what I tend to think of as a righteous sense of impatience to do the right thing for our students, but they also feel that way about their careers and their career progression more so than some of us and other generations perhaps have. So it's a little hard to keep up with that once in a while. But the other thing that I would say too, that's a little bit different for our advisors also really comes back to that pressure that we were talking about earlier. And that's one of the things that for me is hardest to balance, because the enrollment pressures with the understanding of how much impact our advisors can have on our students. Everybody wants the advisors to now do everything. So it's wonderful that the institutions now really have begun to understand the real value and importance of advising in ways that we used to have to fight for. They get it now. They get it a little differently than we've been trying to say it, but they get it now. It's just that advisors are now being asked to do so many things, and that is just fine if you have enough advisors to do all the work. So I would say that that's one of the pieces that from a leadership standpoint, we've got to work really, really hard to try to manage. And some of that is either we have to advocate for the appropriate resources for the advisors to be able to do their jobs, or we have to be able to set some boundaries around the job that we're asking them to do. Because at the end of the day, burning out our advisors is not the answer to student success either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just feel like there's so much, like every answer that both of you have given, such great tidbits that I think listeners of anyone watching this, or when they attend the live session in Portland, will gain from this. I mean, Leah talking about moving up, but sometimes there's not a structure. There's no career ladder for advisors. Or Tara, the advice of there needs to be balance. Administrators need to advocate, set boundaries. It's a continuing conversation, and it's always going to be ongoing. And as we wind down with this interview, from your perspectives, what lessons have you, as advising administrators, what have you learned about yourself through these years, and the staff, the advisors that you supervise? So, Leah, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. What have I learned about myself? Listen more than you speak. That is a big one. It's okay to ask for help. I personally learned so much from my advisors and the people that I supervise. I think that's really important. Sometimes we can think with a title that we have arrived and there's nothing else to learn. And a lot of my current direct reports have really been insightful in terms of just perspective and how to think about things, especially as it relates to my current institution. And it's okay to fail. You're going to have missteps. Own those missteps, right? I think one of the things I've seen it pan out not very well, but also have learned from myself, is that people appreciate transparency, authenticity, right? When you mess up, say you mess up. If you can't own that and be honest about that, people won't trust you. So when I misstep and I'm like, hey, I could have did that better. I apologize for that. I will get it right next time. People do appreciate that. And I think more than anything, whether you're an expert in the area, you're coming up with all these great ideas and initiatives, they appreciate the honesty, the transparency, and the authenticity.
I would completely agree with that, Leah, and that transparency and authenticity is so important to people. And I also am constantly reminded, Simon Sinek talks about the fact that two keys to really effective leadership are empathy and perspective. And my natural sense is to provide that empathy in general anyway. But one of the things that I think is always so important for all of us is to continue developing our perspective as we continue to think about how we reshape who higher education is meant for and how we create more access and more opportunity, continuing to develop our perspectives about what our student needs and our student populations are and what their opportunities are is really important. Thinking about the perspectives of our advisors. Sometimes they are very different than the people that are in positions of leadership, but really understanding and valuing those perspectives are really important. And I've also, as much as we've talked about it since the pandemic, learned how much communication, leadership communication really means to our frontline advisors especially. It's interesting how important those words are, how important the validation is, how important it is that some of our frontline people see and hear, we have leadership that gets it. Because at the end of the day, they want to wake up and show up to do work in places where your leaders get it and where your leaders understand and where it feels like everyone's got a really common goal at the end of the day. And leaders can't do that very effectively when we sit quietly and choose not to communicate with our people. So that's something I have to remind myself, because sometimes I think, I'm just in the background supporting all these folks. But every once in a while they remind me, we need you to say something right now.
No, those are very strong points. I totally echo and support both of what you shared. Communication, transparency, honesty. Leah, the point of it's okay to fail. I think sometimes people will do everything right to not fail, which sometimes maybe you need to fail in order to learn how to do something better and how to improve upon it, right? But if you never allow yourself the opportunity to do that and the grace, right? Then there's going to be things that you'll never learn that you could only have learned through particular lessons. And Tara, I completely agree. With your statements. I just want to I don't know if your staffs tell you thank you, but I know that as a leader, sometimes when you're on the top of that mountain and the wind's whistling in your ears and you're sitting there all alone, it's just really, for me, I feel it's important. I'm just hearing this in my heart to just affirm what you're doing for both of your institutions and how you're leading your folks. Sometimes people don't recognize how lucky is the word that I'll use, but how fortunate they are in order to work for such wonderful women who are leading the way, because they may not understand all the work that you have done in order to keep leading them in that right. You know what I mean? Like sometimes people they think that, well, it's just because she knows. It's like, oh no, I made a mistake in the future that has made me move differently right now. I mean, in the past, that's making me move differently right now, or I've read something, or I'm reading the room differently. I'm reading energies differently, whatever that is, right? However you want to show up in that space. So I just want to thank you both for all the work that you've done and that you're doing, and that I know that you'll continue to do.
Oh, thank you, Melinda. See, this is why we're all friends, but we really appreciate your leadership in this as well. And we're so excited that you're our executive director of NACADA.
Oh, thank you. And, Matt, as always, I always love hosting with Matt because these conversations are so riveting, and, over 30,000 downloads, right, Matt? Right.
Yes, we just hit over 30,000 downloads of the podcast. So.
Right. So I could just imagine coming into this annual conference experience and being able to do this in such an amazing format that Matt's been able to provide and to support these conversations to help people grow and to think about how they see themselves in this space, because we know it's changing rapidly, right? So who knows what the next 5 or 10 years is going to be. But Matt, do we have time to ask them that question about the future of advising?
I've got the time, so as long as Tara and Leah have time to answer it, yes, let's keep recording.
Yeah, I would love to end this podcast with that question of, what do you think the future of advising holds for us?
Leah, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
I love it. It was like, who's on first?
It's funny, as I was looking at this question before, I'm trying to think, how far ahead do I jump in terms of what I see. I think if we step just immediately forward, one of the things that I think is really, really clear, obviously, is the ability to do remote advising from just about anywhere. It works. Most of us have not gotten into a comfort zone of saying, well, all advising should be remote, right? We've not really done that, and in part that's as a means of keeping our teams strong and healthy, is to have that opportunity to be together in addition to serving and supporting our students in remote formats. but students like remote advising. I know our perception of quality of advising actually went up when we went fully remote during the pandemic. Our no-shows dropped. I think we're seeing that in a lot of different places. Even though about 40% of our students still say that they'd like in-person advising, we find that at the last minute they flip those to remote because it's easier. It's too cold outside, or I'm still in my pajamas, or it's just more convenient to access that way. And I think that we learned that whereas students did not necessarily value group interactions online in classes and so forth, they have valued one-on-one interactions online. So what that creates then is a very, very different opportunity for advisors to actually be marketable globally. It's not just on your campus, it's not just in your region, and how that actually can impact the future of work for advising has all kinds of different implications. I'm actually wondering if 10 years from now we're going to see advisors as nearly free agents. We've got a very different kind of a gig economy going on in other arenas, and it's very hard to imagine higher ed going there. But if there's a way for that to become a good thing for advisors, I'd be willing to bet that they'll figure out a way to do it. I really don't know if we'll go there or not, but it's really an interesting thing to think about. It's not something I would necessarily recommend because I like that advisor connection and relationship and insight and understanding with their faculty and the curriculum in the institution. But it's going to be interesting truly to see how all of this moves.
So I have big dreams, sort of. So one of the things I would love to see continue to grow are positions like Tara's that are senior administrative positions that get to sit at the table, that get to be in the ear of the chancellor. I think that those positions are so important, and we're starting to see more of them. But I think having someone, especially someone who comes from kind of that advising background and understands and can really be a great translator of the day-to-day that advisors and advising administrators up to cabinet, I think it's so important. Right, the role of advisors and advising administrators and our students are evolving. I think it is so important to have someone that understands that day to day, that understands the evolution of our students in the way that advising impacts that and student success, that could translate that up, right? Because I think that's, I went to the the Administrators Institute this past year, and so many of the challenges that we heard was that the people at the top, senior leadership, they don't understand the impact of some of the decisions. And I think having positions like Tara's, I think is going to kind of mitigate some of that frustration for those of us that are kind of in the day-to-day and helping to lead advising charges on our campuses. And so another wish list item for me is that we would actually have an advising mental health counselor that is embedded in all of now that is a huge wish list, right? Like I understand that, but I think our advisors need it. I think they're carrying a lot, and I think our students need it, right? And I think having someone that's actually embedded into each of our advising units to help us think through and process some of the things that we are carrying, whether it's from our own work or our students, I think that is going to be clutch as our students continue to evolve.
No, thank you so much. I mean, what I'm hearing in terms of themes are flexibility, right? And then shifting the way that people are thinking about our work in terms of modality. Because as the world continues to get smaller, right, when we start even thinking about, technology, how it's enhanced and improved, and then culturally, right, how we've all shifted. I mean, I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings I was on before the pandemic, and now I feel like that is my life, right? And so the fact that we can move and shift and operate differently, but I think the challenge is always going to be historically, higher education has always done it like this, but we know that we can move differently. We know that we can move faster. We know that we have the ability to transition in a way that we continue to still have the outcome of quality and support that we know our students need. And Lee, you're absolutely right. The mental health perspective, right? That sometimes, people overlooked it, but now you can't, right? So if there's any beauty that's coming out of this dynamic of pandemic culture, it is that mental health is important, just like your physical health. And so how are we thinking about creating new systems or creating new traditions in higher education where that's embedded in these spaces, so that we are not just treating things when they come desperate for people, right? But that we are building a culture in which we are helping people think through how their mental health shows up and how it shapes the way that they work, and not just for our students, right? Cobbler kids have no shoes kind of thing, but for us as well. And so thank you for speaking on that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so we appreciate you both being on this panel for this recording, and then we look forward to seeing you in Portland. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And Leah, like you were talking about the honesty part, thank you both for your honesty with all of this and being vulnerable to share a lot of this information. So we appreciate you both. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having us. See
Thank
you
you,
all in Portland.
Absolutely. And I match my co-host sentiments. Thank you for being you. Thank you for your transparency and honesty and your integrity in the work that you're trying to accomplish at your respective institutions. And yes, see you in Portland, Oregon. I know Matt's got the countdown, so we're going to be rocking and rolling. So thank you so much.
We will. And Matt, thank you for making more of these conversations amongst NACADA colleagues accessible to so many people. We appreciate your leadership work on that for the association.
Absolutely. Thank you.